The conception of being, in its unfathomable oscillation between pure exhalation and recursive annulment, must be understood as neither a mere emanation nor a reductive subsistence. Rather, it exists as the inexorable peridynamic actualization of a pre-substantial autotelic singularity. The locus of this autogenesis is not spatial nor temporal, for such categorizations presuppose the very duality that the autogenesis obliterates in its unfolding. The substratum of existence, then, must be seen as an Echoless Tropicon, a term coined here to describe the ceaseless self-resistance by which being both realizes and annihilates its own preconditions. What we identify as the phenomenon is but the shadow cast by this self-negating movement, a shadow that paradoxically denies its own casting. The object, in its apparent determinacy, is merely the effulgence of ontosymplectic convergence, wherein the subject as observer is enfolded into the object as the observed, resulting in the obliteration of both within an ineffable zone of null relation. To approach this zone conceptually is to invoke the fragility of cognition itself, for thought in its attempt to grasp the autogenesis becomes a co-conspirator in its own collapse. The autotelic singularity, however, is not the negation of differentiation, but its pre-ontological sustenance. Differentiation arises not from the separation of entities, but from the interstitial overflux of their non-relationality. This overflux, a term I derive from the hyperdeterminate logic of self-unveiling occlusion, signals the infinite capacity of being to instantiate itself as both more than and less than itself in a single contradictory pulsation. Herein lies the crux of subsumptive autogenesis, its irreducibility to finitude or infinitude, instead manifesting as a chimeric excess whose very constitution is the perpetual reconstitution of its own impossibility. Let us consider then the concept of identity. Identity, as typically conceived, is rooted in the Aristotelian premise of equals A. Yet within the Onto-Perichoresis of being, identity cannot be thought apart from the asymptotic breach it performs upon itself. Identity, in this sense, is not the affirmation of sameness, but the excruciating non-self-coincidence, whereby it becomes other than identity while remaining irremediably itself. This condition, which I shall name Isomorphic Parallax, is the non-linear trajectory by which the autotelic singularity recursively dislocates its own predicates while retaining their latent potentiality. In approaching the ethical dimension of this framework, one must abandon all presuppositions of morality as grounded in teleological or deontological imperatives. Instead, the ethical emerges as the catastrophic unveiling of being's incapacity to ground itself in any normative structure. The ethical in this autogenetic schema becomes an unbinding praxis, an obliteration of fixed value through the inexorable demand to dwell within the paradox of non-relational relationality. To act ethically, therefore, is not to adhere to a principle, but to bear the burden of principle's collapse within the autotelic fissure of being. Language, too, becomes a site of profound rupture within this system. Words far from serving as carriers of meaning are revealed as loci of dissonance, nodes where the preconceptual flux of autogenesis momentarily crystallizes before dissolving back into its immanence. The sentence, that most basic unit of linguistic thought, betrays itself as a simulacrum of coherence, a mirage that obscures the fact that communication is but a fractalized gesture toward the ineffable. In conclusion, the Onto-Perichoresis of subsumptive autogenesis unveils a philosophical framework in which being is no longer seen as static or definable. Instead, being emerges as an ecstatic overflux, a perpetual recreation of itself through its own annihilation. This system does not merely challenge traditional metaphysics, it annihilates its very foundation, offering in its place a terrifyingly beautiful vision of existence as pure self-negating dynamism.